What's going on, y'all? Casual Take MMA back with another YouTube video. This time we're going to be looking at my UFC GOAT list, which is 100% correct. So I'm sorry to tell you, but if you disagree with any of these takes, you're just wrong. As y'all can see, we've got the GOAT in the middle, the blob. Let's get into it though. I've got three different things that are going to go into this ranking. Starting off first is the quality of wins. So for example, a win over Jon Jones looks a lot better to me than 3 wins over an Anthony Smith. Number 2, we're going to go off quantity of wins. There's a lot of legends in here that have a multitude of wins, but the competition just wasn't that good. And then lastly, we are basing these rankings on longevity. I'm so sick of people just acting like fighter losses doesn't matter because it was at the end of their career or because it was at the beginning of their career. All right, enough said. Let's just get into it. Starting off with number 1. Should be no surprise here. Should be no debate here. We've got Jon Jones. He's 22-0 in the UFC, 21-1 if you want to count the DQ. But I encourage all of you, if you have not seen it, please go watch Jon Jones versus Matt Hamill. It's the funniest loss I've ever seen. This man's got 15 title wins. He's now a 2-division champion, ran the light heavyweight division for years, and is now the heavyweight champion, even though he's ducking Tom Aspinall. But that's a different story. Jon Jones has 2 wins over Daniel Cormier, who you will see later on this list. You can count it as 1 if you want to take off the steroid use, which I get. But then we got Lyoto Machida, Shogun Rua, Alexander Gustafsson, Rampage Jackson, Cyril Gane, Glover Teixeira, and then there is plenty more. I did not have enough room if I was going to list off all of Jon Jones' best wins. So we're sticking with that. This man is undefeated. But a lot of people discredit Jon Jones' win versus Dominic Reyes. I know the judges gave it to Jon Jones. A lot of UFC fans believe that Dominic Reyes won. I honestly thought that Jon Jones barely edged it out, but it is what it is. He's still undefeated in my eyes. Easily the greatest fighter of all time. For number 2, we've got Georges St-Pierre. Should be no surprise here either. This guy is 20-2 in the UFC with 13 title wins, just 2 less than Jon Jones. He was also a 2-division champion. He ran through the welterweight division for years, retired, came back, won the middleweight title from Michael Bisping. GSP doesn't have the best wins out of everybody on this list, but he's got a win over Matt Hughes, which he is 1-1 with. He's got a win over BJ Penn, great win, Carlos Condit, John Fitch, and Nick Diaz. But GSP cannot be number 1 for me. This man has 2, arguably 3 losses in his career. He got knocked out by Matt Serra, choked out by Matt Hughes. I know he avenged both of those losses, but I also believe that he lost to Johnny Hendricks. I know the judges did not think so, but I just rewatched that fight again recently, and I think Johnny Hendricks won that fight. But it is what it is. Even if Johnny Hendricks would have got the nod there, I would probably still have GSP at my number 2. So moving into number 3, we've got Mighty Mouse. This man is 15-3 in the UFC. With 1 draw early in his career. He has 12 title wins, I think 11 title defenses, which is insane. But this is where it gets tricky because Mighty Mouse's competition was not very good. Now his best wins come against Henry Cejudo, which he is 1-1 with, John Dodson, who he beat twice, and Joseph Benavidez, who he also beat twice. Now Mighty Mouse does have a few losses, but I am a little bit more lenient with his losses. He lost to Dominic Cruz early in his career, which he was fighting at bantamweight at that point. And he lost to Henry Cejudo, which was his last UFC fight, and that loss was by split decision. But I'm not going to back up the Brad Pickett loss. That one doesn't look too good. But Mighty Mouse is at my number 3. And this is where it gets interesting. At number 4, I've got Volkanovski. 13-3 in the UFC, 6 title wins, and this is where Volkanovski really shines above a lot of other people on this list. Volkanovski's best wins are Max Holloway 3 times, who you will also see later on this list. Spoiler alert. He also has a win over Jose Aldo, who you will also see on this list. He's got a win over Brian Ortega, the Korean Zombie, who he beat to a pulp. Chad Mendez and Yair Rodriguez. Volk now has 3 losses in the UFC, and I also am a little bit more lenient with these losses because he lost twice to Islam, which is not in his weight class. He was moving up to lightweight, and one of them being on 10 days notice. Not making an excuse for Volk at all, but I think you can be a little bit more lenient with those losses. And then he got brutally knocked out by Ilia Topuria. But obviously, if you know ball, the only reason Volk lost was because of the 35 curse. The universe simply just would not allow Volk to beat Topuria, so you can't hate on him for that. Nah, I'm kidding, but Volk is at my number 4. Moving on, this one might be a little controversial too, but I have Khabib Nurmagomedov. He is 13-0 in the UFC. I know he only has 4 title wins, but this man has some of the best wins compared to anybody in the top 15. He's got a win over Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, RDA, and Edson Barboza. Khabib was undefeated in the UFC and prior to the UFC. If you want to bring up that argument that he fought cans before the UFC, you can. It doesn't matter. We're looking at a UFC list. He only lost 3 total rounds in the UFC. You got to give respect where it is due. I know the sample size is very limited, but the win over McGregor and Poirier are arguably top 30 all-time wins. And then Gaethje, former interim champion, RDA, former lightweight champion. So you can't act like Khabib doesn't have any good wins. This is where that quality factor comes into play over quantity, and Khabib Nurmagomedov is at my number 5. Moving on to number 6, we've got Daniel Cormier. He's 11-3 in the UFC, 1 no contest if you don't want to count the Jones head kick. But this man has 6 title wins, was a double champion, and defended both belts. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I truly believe if John Jones never existed, DC might be top 3 all time. Now, let's look at DC's best wins. He has 1 win over Stipe. He's 1-2 with Stipe. He has a win over Anderson Silva, Alexander Gustafsson, Dan Henderson, and Anthony Rumble Johnson twice. And then, of course, he lost twice to John Jones and twice to Stipe. I am also a little bit lenient with Daniel Cormier's losses because he lost to the greatest of all time twice. No shame in that. And then he lost twice to Stipe, in which he was 40 and 41 years old. Now, I'm not excusing these losses whatsoever, but that's why longevity is number 3 on my list. Daniel Cormier is at number 6. And then we're moving on to number 7. This one might piss some of y'all off that he's this low. But at number 7, I've got Anderson Silva. And before y'all get to say anything, Anderson Silva is my favorite fighter of all time. This is no hate towards Anderson Silva, but he is 17-7 in the UFC. Now, I know all of these losses came at the end of his career, but we can't just look at them and act like it didn't happen. If we were just going to base fighters off their primes, the ranking would be completely different. But still, Anderson Silva, 11 title wins, went on a 16-fight win streak. But then again, the quality is just not really there. His wins come against Dan Henderson, Chael Sonnen twice, Vitor Belfort, and Forrest Griffin. I didn't want to throw Forrest Griffin on here, but I didn't want some of y'all to get mad, so I threw his name up there. But Anderson Silva lost to Chris Weidman twice. He lost to Daniel Cormier, no shame in that. Michael Bisping, Israel Adesanya, which is an excusable loss, I would say. Jared Cannonier, and then Uriah Hall. I can't back you on a loss to Uriah Hall, I'm sorry. Anderson Silva definitely should have hung up the gloves, probably coming off that injury, but you still can't act like these losses didn't happen. I know Anderson Silva was up there in age, but this man lost to every single new-gen fighter that he faced. So Anderson Silva, I'm sorry, but you're at my number 7. Now, if the last one pissed some of y'all off, this one is really going to piss some of y'all off. At number 8, we've got Islam Makhachev. Now, y'all really have to hear me out on this. Islam, 15-1 in the UFC, is currently riding a 14-fight win streak with 4 title wins, but this is where the quality comes into play. This man's quality of wins are up there with the best. He has 2 wins over Volkanovski, who was the pound-for-pound number 1 fighter at the time, a win over Charles Oliveira, Dustin Poirier, and then I put Arman Tsarukyan on here. I know that was his debut fight, but that win has just been aging beautifully. And then obviously he got knocked out by Adriano Martin in 2015. Now, I know the quality is there, but you can nerf these wins down just a little bit just because Volkanovski, one of those wins was on short notice, and Volkanovski is normally a featherweight and he was fighting up, so you can discredit it if you want to a little bit, I guess. The Charles Oliveira win is still phenomenal. And then the Dustin Poirier win, people will say that was on the back end of his career, which is true, but DP looked amazing in that fight. And then obviously the Arman fight was in his UFC debut. Now, I'm sorry, whether you like it or not, Islam Makhachev is at my number 8. All right, moving into number 9, we've got Stipe Miocic, the heavyweight GOAT. 14-4 in the UFC, 6 title wins. Now, Stipe has some really good wins. The only thing is he lost to a lot of these guys also. He's 2-1 with DC, 1-1 with Francis Ngannou, 1-1 with Junior Dos Santos, and then he has a win over Alistair Overeem and Fabricio Verdum. This man has 4 total losses in the UFC. A loss to DC, there is no shame in that. As you saw, DC was, I think, number 6 for me. Francis Ngannou obviously has the power to KO anybody. You can be a little lenient with that loss. He lost to JDS earlier in his career, but then Stefan Struve, bro, I cannot help you with that. A loss to the skyscraper is kind of embarrassing, I can't lie. Lots of love, lots of respect for Stipe, but come on, bro. Stefan Struve. But anyway, he is still the heavyweight GOAT in my eyes. If you scratch a few of these losses off, I think he would be in the top 5 possibly. But right now, he's at my number 9. But he still is the heavyweight GOAT in my eyes. Hey, you never know. Maybe Stipe goes out there and KOs John Jones. If he does that, obviously he'll move higher up my rankings. But for now, he's at my number 9. Moving into number 10, we've got Israel Adesanya. I know this list is missing somebody. Just be patient. Just bear with me. But Izzy is 13-3 in the UFC with 8 title wins. He's also a 2-time middleweight champion, about to become 3 if he knocks out DDP. But Izzy's best wins come against Alex Pereira. That win is aging absolutely beautifully. But he is 1-1 with Alex Pereira. He has 2 wins over Robert Whittaker, a win over Yoel Romero, Jared Cannonier, Paulo Costa, and an old Anderson Silva. A lot of people disrespect Izzy's wins at middleweight. I know a lot of them have not been the most entertaining, but he's got a win over the GOAT of middleweight in Anderson Silva. I know he was older, but then he has 2 wins over the 3rd best middleweight too. I think Silva is still the middleweight GOAT, Izzy's number 2, and Robert Whittaker is number 3. But Izzy has a loss to Alex Pereira, Jan Blachowicz, and Sean Strickland. The Alex Pereira loss, he was winning the whole fight. Got stopped in the 5th. It is what it is. And then he lost to Jan Blachowicz, trying to move up to light heavyweight to become double champ. So I could be a little bit lenient with that one. And then he got absolutely dominated by Sean Strickland. Now that really is a bad look. Not saying Sean Strickland is a bad fighter whatsoever, but that was a stylistic disaster for Izzy. Not making any excuses though for him. He lost fair and square, got dominated. But Izzy is at my number 10. Now I don't know how y'all are going to feel about this, but at my number 11, we've got Max Holloway. This man is 22-7 in the UFC, has had a long UFC career, and still fairly young. He has 5 title wins, with his best wins coming against Jose Aldo twice, Anthony Pettis, Brian Ortega, Frankie Edgar, Justin Gaethje, and Charles Oliveira, which I know was earlier in his career and it was an injury, but that win is aging pretty well too. And then obviously Max has had a few losses in the UFC. He lost to Volkanovski 3 times, who was my number 4 fighter on this list. Lost twice to Dustin Poirier. One of those times was his UFC debut, and the other time was Max moving up to try to become double champ. And then he also lost to McGregor and Bermudez early in his career. You can excuse the Conor McGregor one a little bit. You can be lenient with that one, but Dennis Bermudez, I'm sorry, Max, I can't help you with that one either. Hopefully they'll announce Max Holloway versus Ilia Topuria soon. Give Max Holloway a chance to jump into that top 10. But for now, I've got my boy Max at the 11. All right, for number 12, we've got Kamaru Usman, one of the most dominant title reigns in UFC history. He's now 15-3 in the UFC with 6 title wins. He also was riding a 15-fight win streak until he got KO'd. Usman's best wins come against Tyron Woodley. People forget how good Tyron Woodley really was. He dominated Woodley, beat Colby Covington twice, has a win over Sean Strickland, which is aged beautifully, 2 wins over Masvidal, a win over Gilbert Burns, a win over RDA, and then he is 1-2 with Leon Edwards. Now, if that head kick would have never happened, Usman might have went down as a top 10, possibly top 5 fighter of all time. I think Usman was up 3-1 maybe going into that 5th round and was winning the 5th round until he got blasted with that head kick. But the UFC would be completely different if Leon would have never landed that kick. Usman might still be champion today. Who knows? But he lost the trilogy to Leon also, so you can't back him too much. So he has 2 losses to Leon, and then he has a loss to Khamzat Chimaev at middleweight, which honestly, I don't think that hurts him at all, really. A lot of people think it was a draw. I believe it was like 10 days notice, moving up to middleweight to fight the boogeyman of the division. So take that how you want it. Usman's at my number 12. And finally, here he is, the king of Rio, Jose Aldo at number 13. And before you freak out, you have to hear me out on this. Jose Aldo, 14-7 in the UFC, 7 title wins, also a very dominant run. But his best wins come against Frankie Edgar, who he beat twice, Chad Mendez, who he also beat twice, and the Korean Zombie. Now, the thing for me with Jose Aldo is that he just lost too many times in his prime. Every elite featherweight fighter he fought, he lost to. He got smoked by Conor McGregor in his prime. That's okay, not the worst look in the world. But then he lost twice to Max Holloway. And before you say he was not in his prime, this man Jose Aldo was 30 in the first fight and 31 in the second fight. Maybe not necessarily the peak of his career, but he was still in his prime. And then he lost to Volkanovski, Peter Yan, Merab Dvalishvili, and Marlon Moraes. And every single one of these fighters that I named, except Merab, outstruck him. So when we're talking about the featherweight GOAT conversation, all three candidates being Volk, Aldo, and Holloway. Holloway and Volk both beat Aldo, and Holloway beat him twice. How is Jose Aldo the featherweight GOAT? I don't know, man. Just something to think about. I got Jose Aldo at my number 13. Jam. At number 14, we got Alex Pereira. 8-1 in the UFC, already has 4 title wins. 5 wins against former champions. It's insane what this man has been doing in such a short amount of time. He's already a 2-division champion, won the middleweight belt, and is now currently the light heavyweight champion. They must have took this picture right after UFC 303. But anyway, his best wins come against Israel Adesanya, which he is 1-1 with. He also beat Jan Blachowicz, which is not a title win, but I hold it just as high as a title win. He also beat Sean Strickland, same thing there. Yuri Prochazka twice, and Jamal Hill. Alex Pereira's only loss in the UFC as of right now is to Israel Adesanya, who you could see was in my top 10. No shame in that loss. You could also argue that he got KO'd due to the weight cut since this dude wanted to cut 60 pounds for whatever reason. But it doesn't matter. Alex Pereira is at my number 14. If he beats Ankalaev, he might jump into my top 10. And if this man ends up becoming the 3-division champion, he might be the GOAT. If not, he'll probably be top 3. But Poatan still has a good chance to jump up this list, but for now he's at 14. And finally at number 15, we've got the most iconic figure in all of combat sports, Conor McGregor. McGregor is 10-4 in the UFC with 3 total title wins. I counted that interim as a title win also. His best wins are against prime Jose Aldo, who we just talked about, Eddie Alvarez, Chad Mendez. He's 1-1 with Dustin Poirier. You could say 1-2. I don't care. He broke his leg. There was no check. There was no check. And then Nate Diaz, he's 1-1 with. And then he beat a young Max Holloway, but that win has aged very beautifully also. Now let's talk about McGregor's losses. He lost to Poirier and Nate Diaz. And now I'm finding out I forgot to put Khabib on here. So he lost to DP, Nate Diaz, and Khabib. No shame in the Khabib loss. He's top 5 for a reason. Not too fond of the Nate Diaz loss. And then a Dustin Poirier loss, who is also a top 30 fighter of all time. But he got knocked out by DP, choked out by Nate Diaz, and choked out by Khabib. But he was undefeated at featherweight. This man's prime was insane. If he wouldn't have lost to Poirier, he might be a little bit higher. If he wouldn't have lost to Nate Diaz, he'd definitely be a little higher. But the Mystic Mac is at 15 for me. But that's going to be it for me. Let me know what you disagree with. Let me know what you agree with. If you disagree, I'm sorry, but you're wrong. But be sure to subscribe if you're new. Drop a like. And if you don't already, go follow my TikTok, Casual Take. I post daily UFC content on there too. But we out.